Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have two young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It. On today's show, I'm joined by James Alexander, the Chief Executive Officer of UKSIF and also the Chair of the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance. James has had a prominent career in driving capital into sustainable finance and helping influence and engage politicians around regulation and enforcement, but also working with cities and city governments to drive complex changes into their ecosystem to improve the impact on sustainability and climate change. In this episode, we discuss all of that, his career journey from starting in student politics through to becoming the chief executive of such a prominent sustainable finance organisation and his hopes for the future. So if those things sound of interest to you, I suggest you dive right in. So James, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh. Really excited for this conversation. Excellent.
Well, it's been a long time coming from my perspective. Anyway, you've probably not known it, but since I saw you at the event at Chatham House, I thought you'd be a great guest to have on. So I'm glad we finally get you here. I did give a mini introduction before we started, but I probably didn't do it justice. So would you mind just giving an overview of yourself, UKSIF, and your role there, and then we can go back and tell the story.
Yeah, of course. So, thanks for having me on. I'm really pleased, and yeah, sorry that it's taken me a while to make our diaries align, but there we are. I find these days my diary is so crazy, and that's one of the biggest challenges I have. But we can talk about that later in the podcast, maybe. So I'm chief exec of UKSIF, which is the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association. So we are the membership network for sustainable finance in the UK. Really what that means is that we bring together the financial services industry, and that includes banks, pension funds, asset managers, wealth managers, financial advisors, but also data providers, law firms, research firms, all the bits that kind of go around that industry. We even have some not-for-profits in our membership as well, which is quite exciting. And so it's this big, amazing melting pot of lots of different organizations all working towards sustainability, advancing sustainability in their work, and the role that finance can play in moving sustainability forwards. And so we've grown the organization, which is pretty nice. We're now 320 members, and collectively they manage 19 trillion pounds of assets. So that's the bit that opens doors from our perspective. I've met with Rachel Reeves before the election and said, our members have all these assets, and she said, right, we definitely need to talk. So that's the exciting bit for us, is that having that membership, having those assets. And it's about, how do we work with our members to advance sustainability through finance? And so we're not a trade association in the typical sense that our policy positions are set by the lowest common denominator consensus point of all of our members. Of course, we do a lot of work to engage with members on what our policy should be, but we're also led by our mission. And our mission is all about achieving a sustainable economic future for the UK, achieving the Paris goals, achieving the SDGs. We're not just about climate change, we're also the wider sustainability focus around the SDGs. But we also want to drive leadership, and we want to see our members as leaders on sustainable finance, and we want to see the UK as a leader on sustainable finance. So probably at some point we're going to get into the political environment in the UK and thinking about how that might impact the future for the UK with the new government. So yeah, a lot that we're working on. We do events, we do convenings, we bring members together, we work with politicians and regulators. We've got a big policy focus as well. well. So yeah, a hell of a lot that we're working on.
I can see why the diary is so busy now.
Yes, absolutely.
As I think we can start with, which is clearly in the role that you have and in such a prominent organisation in sustainable finance, and you've been doing this for a long time now. You've got to that place in the industry. But what was it, I suppose, if we go back, that kind of drew you into this space? And I suppose in that journey, which we'll tell, how that shapes, I suppose, your vision for the future of sustainable investment and finance.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I can go back through a little bit of my career history, if that would be useful. I think, like a lot of people, my career has taken a meandering pathway. And if you'd asked me 15, 20 years ago, was I going to be doing this job? A job, frankly, that I'd not heard of. But would I be doing this job? And I probably wouldn't have said I would be. So, my first job out of university, I was the president of my student union, which was a kind of full-time sabbatical role for a year. And then I was elected into the National Union of Students in Scotland, so I was deputy president for a year and then president for a year, and that's, I suppose, where I feel I have a degree in maths, and I feel like the skills I learned in my degree are nothing compared to what I learned in the 4 years after that as a sabbatical, a kind of elected official in student politics. And I mean, it was amazing. It was just around the time of the change of Scottish government. We'd had a Labour government in Scotland for a long time, and that then became the SNP government. And so I really saw it as our job to build relationships with a new government that we hadn't really connected with before, and it was an amazing period. There's I'm so proud of some of the stuff that we achieved then. There's a whole lot of stuff around renting rights. Of course, students are almost all renting, so renting rights for student tenants was a really big thing. And there's loads of law changes have happened on that in Scotland. In fact, some of them are now being repeated in England. So there's things like deposit schemes and renting rights, which are coming in Scotland 20 years before in England. There's of course tuition fees don't exist in Scotland. The final bit of the tuition fees were abolished when I was president of NUS Scotland, and we did a lot of campaigning around that. So a huge amount of stuff happened in that time, but also more importantly, there's a lot of media work, there was a lot of public affairs and comms work, and it was leading an organisation and driving the strategy and driving the politics of an organisation, and it gave me a huge amount of insight. Was I prepared for it? Not at all. Was I in a position to really capitalise on it and make the most of it? No way. But we had really good people around us. There was a great staff team, and kind of getting, I guess, really inexperienced elected people through the kind of processes and challenges of running an organisation like that.
And how, just to interject, how did that actually come about? What was it that made you, without that experience, clearly, what is it that made you look at it and think that would be something I'd like to do, or that was of interest to you?
I don't know. I come from a fairly political family. My dad's been involved in politics for a long time, behind the scenes politics. He's not been elected to anything, but he doesn't want to. That's not what he wants to do. He likes doing behind the scenes politics. So yeah, he was always very politicized. He actually worked for a trade union for a long time, and so was very involved in the Labour Party. And I think that helped. Being brought up in a political family like that really helped. But I think I always kind of look at things and see the way that they're run and think, there's ideas I have here. There's things that I could contribute. There's, I'd be happy to give up my time to help make things, to improve things and see what I can do to make things better. And that's kind of where it came from. It's hard work being elected to stuff. It's very hard, but actually, particularly in student politics, and it's so different. But from student politics is probably the most fierce you can get, because everybody fundamentally believes in the same sort of things. There's a kind of broad view that students should be well treated, that education should be of high quality, that fees should be minimised, that students should have good housing options. These sorts of things. Broadly, everybody agrees with that. The challenge is then, how do you separate who you're voting for? How do you, and it becomes on personality, and it becomes a kind of who you know, and what people think of you. So it's actually can be really nasty, because people are voting purely based on whether they like you and they think that you're a nice person or that you're the right fit, rather than for the policies that you might put forward. So it's a really it's an interesting. I think, and really interesting microcosm of kind of wider politics. And I imagine not unsimilar to the sort of politics that happens inside political parties. So it was a really good time. I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot about kind of managing those sort of political environments, which of course every workplace is broadly a political environment in one way or another. And so I learned a lot about how how to kind of handle some of those sort of situations. And then from there, I moved into I did a lot of work in NUS on the college sector, and there was a review of Scotland's colleges happened at the time, and that then led to me moving into the representative body for the colleges in Scotland. That was really cool. That was a relatively short job for me, but in that time we succeeded in getting another 30 million quid into Scotland's colleges. And one of the really interesting things about colleges, they're this kind of Cinderella sector that everyone knows about universities, but very few people know about colleges. I think partly in Scotland the college sector works slightly different to England. It's not sixth form. You don't have sixth form colleges in Scotland. You kind of do school and then university. So the colleges are literally for further education. So people that aren't going to university, that they do a whole range of other skills, but they take people from every background, and what we always talked about was distance travelled. And you could take, tragically, there's still a lot of people in Scotland that leave school without being able to read and write, or that have, or for whatever reason, come from huge disadvantage, haven't been able to focus on their studies, haven't had a stable family background, or have some sort of mental health conditions or other things that have prevented them from studying, and the school system has just not helped them. And that's where the colleges really jump in and kind of pick up where the school system has failed, or where people have not been able to achieve their full potential, and take people from whatever starting point they come in, and get them to somewhere amazing. And it's just incredible what the colleges are doing. I think there's about 500,000 people in the college sector in Scotland in learning. And so we were able to get new funding for that, help secure more places. There was a huge program of college rebuilding as well, because, and again, one of the benefits of devolution is that you can think more locally. So the Scottish Parliament was for the first time actually focusing on some of the left behind areas of Scotland. And actually, strangely, areas that have still got this huge legacy of industries that have closed. Shipbuilding, where we'd used a huge amount of shipbuilding, where all that closed down very quickly. Mining, steel works, those sorts of things. Actually, a lot of the colleges are now based on the sites where these things used to be. And those communities are still scarred by those industries just disappearing overnight, which of course is something that I have to think about really carefully in the context of climate change. There are a lot of industries that we need to take a strategic approach, because they're no longer sustainable industries. How do we deal with all the people and the communities that rely on those industries? So I suppose some levels links very closely to what I do now. And so that was an amazing job, and then moved into something called the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, which brings together the whole industry base of Scotland, and looks about sustainable economic growth for Scotland. That's its priority and its mission. And so I led a program of work looking at cities, and thinking about, alongside other things, thinking about how the cities of Scotland. I think at the time there were 6 cities. I think there's now 8 cities in Scotland, but I might have got that wrong. I'm sure people will comment below. So we worked together with the Scottish government and the cities to talk about how they can work together. And I have this really strong view, and it's kind of followed throughout a lot of the things that I've done. If you notice, everything I've just talked about is membership associations. I have only ever worked in membership networks, and I have this really strong view of people working together, collaborating to achieve more than they would achieve individually or alone. And so the same is true of the cities of Scotland. How can they work together to achieve more, whether that's on the international stage, whether that's being a bigger kind of force for understanding how to operate and run a city, and to achieve the most for a city. And so we created this sort of demand of the Scottish cities, or kind of program of work that they could work together on. One area was sustainability, another was investment promotion, or attracting investment. And that was around the time of a Scottish election. The government, in fact, all the parties had no idea what to do with this bit of press that we managed to get around this. And so they all said, well, we'll create a cities minister and we'll create a cities strategy. And so when the election came, the new cities minister was appointed. Actually happened to be Nicola Sturgeon, who then became First Minister of Scotland. So I spent a lot of time working with her. And so the government said, right, well, you asked for this. What's the strategy going to be? So then we had to start doing a lot of work on the city strategy, and created a new body called the Scottish Cities Alliance, which is still going, and actually doing a lot of work on sustainability for the cities in Scotland too. And maybe just to complete the story, because I'm sure you want to ask me questions about all this stuff, but to very quickly complete the story, from there, that got me into the city space, and I moved to C40 Cities, which is the job immediately prior to this one. And C40 is a network of the world's biggest cities working to cut their emissions and become more resilient to the effects of climate change. So it's the 100 biggest cities from around the world. So if you asked a child to kind of put a list of cities that they'd heard of, they'd probably say things like New York and Beijing and Tokyo and London and Paris. That's the sort of cities that we dealt with. It was a pretty amazing time. I was there for 7 years and did a huge amount of work setting up new solutions for cities. So I actually managed to attract $40 million of government funding to create a project preparation facility, because we found this problem that cities had lots of great ideas of things that they wanted to do. And they would say, why is nobody financing the projects that we're bringing to them? And so we would speak to the finance folks and say, what's the deal with these city projects? Why are you not working on them? And they said, they're not projects, they're ideas. We can't finance an idea. So there's clearly a gap in the middle that projects were just falling into, which was, the city had taken them and progressed them as far as they could, which was still not far enough for an investor to get behind them. And that was the gap that we filled. So there's now $1 billion worth of infrastructure that's being structured and financed as a result of the program that we worked on.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, yes, lots of questions I'd love to ask you on that. I think we'll start on the city strategy for Scotland, because as you say, sort of being involved from the ground up, co-writing that strategy, or was it in collaboration? Yes. Obviously convening the council leaders, getting this joint declaration that you did on sustainable economic growth. But given that it was something that was so new, perhaps you could share some of the challenges, or the challenging conversations at least you had in that time, and the different perspectives people were coming from, and how you could bring that together.
Yeah, I mean, the first challenging conversation was to get all the city leaders in a room. So that was one of the hardest things. So we got them all to sit down in a room together. And of course, there's all these different, they're political, they're elected folks. They're all from different parties. We said, okay, we've got you all here because we want you to work together to jointly achieve more. And they kind of looked around the room and went, work with these guys? No, I can't work with these guys, not a chance. And we said, no, don't throw it out so quickly. There's some really exciting things you could do that are kind of pretty much beyond politics. Working internationally to attract investment is not really political. And that actually are the sorts of things that fundamentally your constituents are expecting you to do. Just because you're elected from different parties doesn't necessarily mean that you should hate each other and never work together. That's not how this is supposed to work. You're not really in competition. You should be working collaboratively to achieve more. And so we kind of got past that, and that was really exciting. And so, we did agree this set of priorities of things that they wanted to work on. And I think part of what made it so powerful was because it was cross-party, because they had this shared narrative of not, this isn't something party political that all the Labour or all the SNP leaders are calling for. This is something that people have agreed on jointly. I think that really helped. Again, part of how you can make politics work for you and deliver what you want is, in some ways, getting political agreement, cross-party agreement, because those things stand the test of time.
For sure, yeah, and lots of I suppose similarities in the business sense, as you said, in political agendas within organisations and convening stakeholders. It's one of the biggest skills that we look for on behavioural traits in sustainability leaders, regardless of the sector, is being able to work cross-functionally and bringing people together. So perhaps not so opposing views in an organisation, you'd like to think anyway, as cross-party, but I can see why that stood you in good stead for the future. And then into the C40 cities, one of the things that stood out to me when we were talking prior to this was around not what you were doing, but I suppose the internal challenges that you were facing with growing the organisation at the same time. And I think you referred to building the plane while flying it, and that analogy I think can be widely used in the wrong context sometimes, but certainly from your growth of 30, I think, to 400 would have been that case. So tell me about some of the challenges there, and how, when you are under this spotlight of growth and being put into really prominent positions, you can still grow an organization that can deliver under that scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, so just and I wasn't the chief executive of C40, but the phenomenal person called Mark Watts was, and actually just on Mark, one of the things that he's done that I have taken huge, or basically copied entirely his approach, was when he took over. So he took over C40 I was there for 7 years. He took over after I'd been there for a year, and so I worked with him for 6 years on this. And he's an incredible person, and he is passionate about sustainability and climate change, and the organisation he took on was fundamentally a cities network, and it was focused on cities. And he kind of said, came in and spoke to all the staff and said, what do you think this organisation's about? And the answer was broadly, it's helping with cities, it's working with cities, it's getting cities together. And he didn't like that, and I get why he didn't like it, because it was set up to work on climate change in cities, and so he turned it from being a cities-focused organisation to be a climate change-focused organisation, a mission-focused organisation, and that's been one of the biggest lessons that I've had is how to create that transformational change, how to create that cultural change, but how to create an organization that works itself around a mission, and that focuses and builds on a mission all the way through. And so that's been an incredible learning experience of how to do that, and something that I've definitely basically copied and pasted his approach in UKSIF, but we can talk about that for sure in a minute. In terms of the role that I played, I started off as leading the finance. In fact, my job was to lead the finance program all the way through. So not to do the internal finance, but to lead the work to help cities finance stuff, and drive a greener economy at the same time. I was a one-man band to start with. I was there when we were a team of 25 people. The head office was in Los Angeles, which is an absolute nightmare when you live in London. But what happened just as I started, there was a huge injection of new funding that came through, which was very much helped by Michael Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York at the time, obviously one of the wealthiest people in the world, with an incredible philanthropic foundation. And he became chair of C40, and he said, well, if I'm going to be chair of this, I want to be chair of something that's good. And so he put in a huge injection of cash from his foundation, which still supports C40. And he said, I want this to turn into something really, really impressive and powerful. And to be able to attract more funding as well, which it did. And so I was there just as that kind of roller coaster ramped up. And we went, like you said, we went from 25 people when I started to about 300 or 400 when I left. And that growth still continues in the years since, which is phenomenal. And so I remember the first time, there was no HR when I started. I remember the first time somebody announced that they were pregnant. Everyone, the kind of management went, oh my God, what do we do? Like, what's the rules? How do we work this out? Of course it worked out fine and everything was fine, but there were no structures, there were no processes. Do you know what? I kind of like that though. I kind of like this ability, the nimbleness that you get from having, I guess not to the extreme of having no HR processes, and so definitely something I've worked on in UKSIF is to bringing proper HR processes. But having this nimbleness that comes with being flexible and being being able to adapt to circumstances, and I think you do lose some of that when you grow. When you're 300 or 400 people, it's very much harder to turn. Become more like an oil tanker trying to turn than a rubber dinghy. So it's very different, but it's also amazing to see. So I was responsible for some of that growth. My team grew from me to about 25, 30 people, and partly this project preparation facility. We created new partnerships. There's a partnership with the German Development Corporation, which brought in another 60 odd people to the project as well. So there was a huge team that I was kind of overseeing. And that obviously brings in enormous challenges. It changes your role entirely. It makes it much more strategic, much more focused on long-term sort of direction of travel than it does on day-to-day. And that was, a really interesting process to get my head around, which I think held me in good stead for my role at UKSIF and where I've moved to. And I think every role, every job, you sort of start to get to a point where you kind of think thinking about moving on, thinking about what's next, and thinking about taking that next step to actually fully leading an organization rather than leading a program or a team. It's about leading a full organization and the set of skills that brings with it. Now, of course, that's not for everyone, and everybody has different career aspirations, and that's one of the most exciting things of working with people, is to understand what motivates them, understand where they want to go, where they want to get to, what they enjoy. For me, definitely having this incredible opportunity to lead and run something, to structure things, to change things and move them around, is something that I really enjoy, and I think that adds a lot of value to organizations I'm part of.
You said at the beginning that if 15 or so years ago you'd been asked about, if you were to be doing this sort of role, and the answer would have been, it wouldn't have existed, or you wouldn't have even known what it was. But was leading an organization always something that was important to you? I mean, obviously it happened quite early on in a way with the roles that you did quite early on in your career, but was that something that you always knew you wanted to do?
I mean, I definitely enjoy leadership. It's something that I feel I'm good at. I enjoy thinking about strategy. I enjoy, understanding where there are opportunities and working out what we need to do to make them happen. And I feel entrepreneurial is not maybe the right word, because it's not starting up companies per se, but it's starting up programs and projects and looking at the way that we do things and thinking about them in a different way. And that's something that I really value and enjoy doing. And I think, hopefully looking at the sort of track record, I feel like I'm actually quite good at. Certainly, I think selling a vision is something that I'm very good at. Thinking about where there are challenges, where there are opportunities, and then, but also more importantly, working out, well, what can we do with the resources that we have? But also, what resources do we not have, and where do we get those resources from? So UKSIF, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, we definitely can do more. We're perpetually at that stage of saying no more than we're saying yes to things, to ideas and to things, and that's not surprising. The challenge of addressing climate change and solving the SDGs is basically infinite. There's an infinite amount of work that we could get up in the morning and do. And so what are the principles around which we would decide whether or not to do something? Now, clearly, is someone else already doing it? If they are and they're doing it well, fine, great, go for it. Would it be a value for them if we supported that work and added value to it, maybe through that way? Great, let's talk about it. But often we find that, because again, this is such a new space, because it's not well funded, because it's not well organized necessarily, there's a lot of stuff that's just not being done at all. And you think, well, hang on, we've got this big challenge here. We've got to be making sure, with climate change in particular, that we're doing things at the pace and scale that the timelines and the challenge requires. No one's doing anything at the pace and scale required. And so, we've got this enormous challenge. How do we figure out what to do about it? We're going to need to find more resource. Where do we get that from? So first step, get new members, bring in more members, give us more capacity, give us more ability to do things, look at our membership fee structure. How can we increase membership fees? Well, the only way we can do that is by making sure we're giving a good service. Okay, so what's challenging with our service? Where are we falling down? Where are we not meeting member expectations? But importantly, where are we over exceeding member expectations? And so thinking really carefully about what I call the happy curve, which is all the different things that we do, and whether they're the things that members want us to be doing, whether they're things members value, and if they're things that members really value and we're not doing them well enough, how do we increase them? If they're things members sort of don't really value at all, but we're spending a lot of time and resource on, well, maybe we lower that down so that we can increase other things. And that's a management approach that it's actually Lexus that adopted that. They created, when the Lexus brand was created, I think it's a Toyota brand, when they created the brand, they looked at the other premium cars, BMW and Audi and others, and said, what do they offer? And what do people want? And what the engineers in BMW and Audi were focused on was making a really good engine that was, able to go fast and accelerate quickly and all these sorts of things. And on the assumption, if you're an engineer, that's basically what you do. You think about efficiency and how engine can be bigger and better. And I get that there's a market for that. But what they really did was a lot of consumer research said people don't really care about that because there's speed limits. There's a limit to how fast you can go, obviously. What people care about is, does the car break down? And if it does break down, how easy is it to get it fixed and what customer service you get? And they found that they got that very poorly from BMW and Audi. And so Lexus said, we're not going to build the fastest car in the world because nobody wants that. That's overdoing it on something that people don't want and upping the cost of the car. What we'll do is make it the same sort of price as BMW and Audi, but invest all that extra money into really great customer service and really great reliability. And that's what led to the Lexus happy curve. And so I took that same management approach and thought, well, where are we overdoing things? And so reduced some programs down to allow us to build up other programs. That really boosted membership retention, gave us a lot more I think credibility from our members. People wanted to be part of what we do. We're able to increase our fee slightly and get new members on board. And that gave us a lot more resource to get stuff done. Was it enough? No. And so I started going out there and thinking about where else is there funding in this space? And so I went to some foundations and said, look, this is our 5-year growth plan. This is what we aim to be achieving in year 5. How about we shortcut that? How about we achieve those things now by getting some funding that would basically allow us to meet our 5-year growth plan, but in year 1 rather than year 5. And that's something that was taken on board. We got a grant from a foundation. I'm actually hopefully in the process of getting that renewed right now. But of course, foundation grants are very complicated and tricky to understand how to renew. But that's where we're at, is thinking about what is the need, what is the value we can add, what is the value that other people can add, and so we can encourage them to do things. So we've been working with some universities to say, hey, there's a real need for some training and some courses out there in the market. We're not going to write them. It's not our job. It's not our skill set. But we need somebody to do it. Would you like to do that? Great. And so actually Cambridge has just published a new course called Sustainability Essentials for financial services, which is really cool. So some things it's not our job to do, but it's our job to encourage. But some things we think really is our job to do, and building up our comms and public affairs particularly is something that we really wanted to do, and we've been able to do it.
For sure, understood. So moving now into UKSIF, I'm really keen, I suppose, to understand, and something that you just picked up on there is what the members want and how you add value. So if you were to sort of summarize the service offerings that you give to your members in a few different categories, what would you say that they are? How do you break those down to be providing that value?
Yeah, so we actually think about the organisation in 2 parts. What we deliver in 2 parts. One is how we work inside the industry. We call it industry development. It's about how we support the industry to move forwards on sustainability, kind of on its own. So it's, I suppose, the carrot approach, which is to get people to work together, to share, to share their best practice, to share their learning and experiences, things that have gone well, things that have not gone well, bring people together on specific topics, but also to have big industry convenings and gatherings. We definitely believe that if people know each other, so if you know the same person that's doing your sustainability job in a similar institution, and you've got a regular interaction with them, you're going to start meeting up for coffee. You're going to talk about some of the challenges you're facing, and you're going to share insights on how you've all overcome those challenges. And that's what we want. We want to build this amazing community of people working together on sustainability and finance, being in regular contact, sharing solutions, sharing ideas. This is all a new area for the whole financial service industry, and so it's so important that we are working together to learn as we go. Now clearly, of course, different firms are in competition with each other in different parts of this space. When our job is not to get people to collaborate on things that are competitive. In fact, we actively avoid that. But it's to help people to just learn and share experiences and best practices, but also to develop new areas of work. There are policies and things that we're only just beginning to think about. How do we issue green mortgages en masse? How do we finance difficult to achieve things like hydrogen? What is so there's actually a lot of stuff where people are learning as we go. There's also new regulations that are being brought in all the time, many of which we're calling for, but we're now also supporting the industry to adapt to the regulations as they're brought in. So that's one half, and that's also we have a big events program there. Talking of the happy curve, one of the things we realized that members really wanted, because actually I started midway through COVID, which meant it was all work from home. Remember those horrible days when you couldn't leave the house? So it was all work from home. And I spent 10 hours a day on Zoom calls with our members. I kind of got through our whole membership in about 3 months, which was actually an amazing thing to do. I was absolutely exhausted by the end of it. But what was great was not it was a bit weird because I didn't meet really anyone in person, which is always a shame because I love meeting people face to face. But it meant I could get round and have so many conversations and really get under the skin of what people wanted us to do and what people felt we weren't doing. And events was something that people really wanted more from. Clearly during COVID, events were very complicated to deliver. We actually did conferences, full day conferences entirely by Zoom, and people hung around as well.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah. So it was pretty cool. I mean, I could talk all day about some of those COVID experiences, but I'm sure we'd all rather forget COVID and pretend it never happened. But it meant I really had a good understanding, and bringing people together, having that convening, having the events was something people wanted more of. So we went from a handful of events a year to 30 events a year. 5 of which are big flagship conferences, and actually this is an example of my management approach, which I try and set the overall strategic direction, and then give the team to allow the team to feel empowered to just kind of get on with the things they want to do. My hope is that I create a culture where other people come to me or come up with ideas and feel empowered, even if that idea might not go well. So if somebody says, I want to do a thing, I'll say, great, how are you going to resource it? Do you think it's going to work? But I will never say this needs to work, because it might well not work. We're trying new stuff, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. It's totally fine if it doesn't work. We have to learn from it and not just keep flogging a dead horse. But if it doesn't, if we try something and it doesn't work, I'm actually happy with it. I'd rather we tried it than we didn't try it at all. Yeah. So one of those examples, actually tried something and did work, is to create a new event called our Alternative Investment Week, which is thinking about how the hedge funds and the private equity and private credit can actually get involved in sustainable finance and bring that part of the industry into this space as well. People thought we were crazy when we first started doing this, and we've now got 3 years on, we're having this amazing conference all about these topics and issues and helping people think further about those areas. So that's the kind of one half, which is the inside the industry, like the inside game, if you think about it that way. And then the outside game is about the industry looking to the outside and saying what it needs, and saying what we want to see happen. So we spend a lot of time working with members to build up a set of policy positions. In fact, one of the first policy things that I did was to just by kind of chance, there was a lot of vacancies when I started in this role. The previous chief exec was building up to retirement. Therefore he had a long notice period, a really long notice period. So people that left that he thought would be better for the new chief exec to replace, he didn't fill those job roles. Now, that was a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing in the sense that I got to bring on board a whole bunch of people that filled the skills gaps that I don't have. The curse was that we went for a year without having a lot of really key staff roles in place. And one of those was the head of policy. And so I recruited a new head of policy very quickly. And we worked together on working with members to create this policy vision. And it basically set out on paper what we believe and what we don't believe, and what we want to see the world look like. And what was really great about that was it gave us, I guess, a model of what we want, of what we believe on a whole range of topics. So if a journalist or somebody comes to me, or if I'm at a conference speaking and someone says, what do you think of this? I'm saying, well, actually, we've got our full view on this. Here's what we think. And we've really thought this through, and this is where we want to see things go. The other thing is it helped me understand where the red lines are. When you're somebody that really cares passionately about sustainability in an organization focused around financial services firms that are tightly regulated, and there is always that risk that you way overstep the line, and that you start moving away from what your members want to see. And so what this document helped do was to figure out where the red lines are, and what people think is beyond what we should be calling for, beyond what is capable. And of course, the real challenge is kind of connecting together the mission, which sometimes is at odds with where the members are. Not often, actually, I have to say, not very often. Members are really passionate about moving forward, but it helps us understand where those red lines are. And I didn't actually, also interestingly, didn't find many red lines, so that was quite positive. So the reason why we did this was because that gave us the opportunity to then go out into the regulators, the politicians, the officials that work in different government departments, build all these new contacts and say, hey, this is what we want to see. And we're going to be starting to tick off the things that we see you doing. And we're going to be starting to give you the evidence base for why these things are important. And we're going to be giving you the industry insights and the industry leaders calling for these things, that will showcase and promote how important this is for us as an industry. part of that was setting a big picture vision, saying, we want to be the world's leading sustainable finance centre, and that's a huge thing for the UK's jobs and growth agenda. We want to be driving the whole world's transition from here in the UK from a financial perspective, but more importantly, we want to be driving private capital, the private capital that we have, the 19 trillion pounds that we have. We want that to be flowing into the UK economy, and think of how great that would be if that happened. And so for the election that just happened, we published 4 documents, policy documents. Again, another strategic shift for us, because we kind of looked back at where, thinking about where we've come from. So we've been around for 30 years as an organisation, really proud of that record of what we've achieved in that time. A lot of that's been focused on sustainable finance regulation, and there's a huge amount of things that have happened in that space. There's a few things outstanding at this point, but the interesting thing is we're now at the kind of end of that regulatory journey. There's we need a lot of stuff to embed, a couple of things still to come in, but there's not a huge amount more to go at this stage. And the challenge is that the money's not flowing in the way that we think it should. We're not seeing that huge amount of capital movement going in the way that we want it to see. Also, we're not seeing we continue to see what we're calling misaligned incentives, and we're actually publishing a report on this at COP in the next few weeks, because there's still a whole range of reasons why a rational investor thinking rationally, thinking about financial returns, is still often more incentivized to invest in the wrong thing, what I would call the wrong thing, the unsustainable thing, than they are incentivized to invest in the really sustainable thing that's going to stand the test of time. Now, why is that? And what is the range of reasons why that's happening? And what are the range of things that governments are doing and causing that lead to that happening? And so that's where we've started to focus. And we're thinking, therefore, about the wider economy. How do we get our members' investment capital into the transition of the UK economy? And so we published 4 reports, only one of which was on financial services and financial services regulation. The other 3 were on key industry areas: energy, transport and housing, some of the most highest emitting areas of the UK economy, and areas where private capital can make a huge difference. Sure. And so that's been the focus of our external engagement in the last few months.
Great. So I think dialing into that point around government and your position of influence there, how does the organisation navigate its relationship with government? Obviously thinking about your own policy objectives, holding government to account, I suppose, in driving sustainable finance forward. And then secondly, given the recent shift, which actually was quite interesting with what you described back at the start of your career, and it going from Labour to Conservative after all of those years, conversely now going from a Conservative leadership to a Labour leadership, what opportunities do you see in this new political sphere to accelerate sustainable finance?
So, first thing to say is we are a fiercely non-partisan organisation, and so we would always say that we will work with any politician that wants to work with us, with any minister, regardless of what their party is. It's not our job to tell people how to vote or who to vote for or whatever. Our job is to work with the leadership of the country and the politicians to see the change that we want to see. And the good news is that net zero, despite some of the setbacks that we've had in the last couple of years, net zero remains a broadly cross-party consensus focus. There will of course be a Conservative view on the way the Conservatives would like to achieve net zero, and a Labour view on the way the Labour Party should achieve net zero, and a range of views in between. There is a growing number of, I think, still a strong minority of people that think net zero is something we shouldn't be focusing on. Our job is to explain why that's wrong, and explain why that's not only wrong from a sustainable environmental perspective, but also wrong from an economic perspective. It's the biggest global economic transition we're going to see since the Industrial Revolution, and we need to be a part of it, or we're not going to have the economy we rely on now. So yeah, I think we clearly a change in government is an opportunity to help set a new agenda. We're actually quite excited by some of the things the Labour Party put in their manifesto, and that's partly because we helped to influence the Labour Party in opposition. And these reports that I talked about, they were absolutely designed to influence the election process, not to influence the result of the election, obviously, but to influence what was in the manifestos. And we saw particularly the Labour Party and the Lib Dems pick up a lot of our policy suggestions, which we're really pleased about. We think that's really positive. we did struggle with the previous government towards the end, as the rollbacks on net zero started to happen, and that was extremely disappointing. And it's what's most disappointing about it is its effect on investor confidence. Now, a classic example is the 2030 electric vehicle mandate. Investors saw the government put that in. And because what government does is actually important in the wider economy and is important to investors, contrary to what some politicians believe, that message, that signal from government meant that investors said, well, hang on, if we invest in electric vehicle infrastructure, the plug-in points or battery factories and all these sorts of things, then actually there's a market for that. We know that there'll be a market for that because of this EV mandate, because of the requirement for people to change their vehicle or change the new vehicles by 2030. And the mandate had the effect of making used car EV vehicle sales increase, and it had a really positive effect. It drove investment, it made people buy electric vehicles, it created that transition we want to see, and government didn't have to spend a penny on it. It was a mandate that was in law. Obviously there were some electric vehicle subsidies in there, but that was slightly different. But broadly speaking, that was not something government needed to pay for. It was something that the government could send as a signal to market, and market was then picking that up. What happened? Change that target 2035. Suddenly you destroy that investor confidence. Overnight, you basically say, you go from a government that's saying, we're with you, we want you to invest in the long term in these things, and this is where we want to see focus, to, oh, we're wavering. Times have got tough, we're not that convinced anymore, we don't really think this is a priority. Where does that leave investors? Investing our pensions for the long term, trying to get a return and relying on government policy for that. So it's really damaged investor confidence. Now, what we're hoping is that a new government coming in that recognises the need for investor confidence, that recognises also the need for private capital. This is not, you cannot pay for this transition by public money, and we shouldn't try. It's always one of the biggest frustrations that I had with the previous government when I spoke to ministers about why the UK was not responding to the US Inflation Reduction Act, which of course creates huge subsidies for a lot of stuff in the US. The response was always, well, we can't afford to do that. And I said, well, you're looking at this all the wrong way. If the only thing you think that we can do to respond to this is to create our own set of subsidies, then it's the misunderstanding the challenge. The challenge is that Britain is not a strong destination for investment because investor confidence is low, because we've got huge problems like planning that can take 10 years for a wind farm to get through planning. Even if you get it through planning, you can't plug it into a grid because we haven't built out the grid infrastructure. So there's actually a lot of underlying challenges in the UK economy. But interestingly, the US has those similar underlying challenges. And so even with the Inflation Reduction Act, everything's not perfect in the US. So we have to find a way to make the UK a comparatively better investment destination than the US and other parts of the world. And that is what I'm hoping the new government really understands. So our offer to the new government is, we're here to support you with this. We're here to find ways to drive private capital, to understand what's causing the blockages in the system, and to help figure out where we can move to, I suppose, that would drive and bring in all that private capital. And that is what's going to create the growth agenda. Now, the UK government is talking about growth as their overarching priority. Of course, we want it to be sustainable growth. I think the government gets that the future of the economy is not in the industries of the past, is in the industries of the future. And that's where we want to see, and that's where basically what we're saying to ministers is, listen to us, listen to our policy suggestions. And to be fair, we're already seeing some of that. The de facto ban on onshore wind has been lifted almost on day one. The new grid interconnector between Scotland and the north of England has been approved. GB Energy has been set up, albeit it's not entirely clear how GB Energy works at this point. And so, there's a lot of positive things happening. And our offer to government is, we're here to give you more advice and input on that.
And how much influence do you feel that you have, or how can you hold them to account if they waver on some of these areas that they are committing to? What can you do in your position?
So, we obviously have a lot of meetings with the government and with officials. We're still trying to. I think that at this moment in time, the government is still very new. They're still kind of getting their feet under the desks in the ministerial offices and figuring out exactly how that works. I think it's also clear that there's a strong 100-day plan that has been clearly coordinated and worked out. I think our big fear is that government gets blown off course by the number of commitments that they've made, the number of different groups and that they're trying to keep happy. The size of the sort of electoral coalition that they have, they've got a huge number of seats, but a lot of those seats are not won by very large margins. And so it wouldn't take a big swing to reverse a lot of those seats. And so I think there's probably some nervousness in the Labour Party about that. And so the question then is how do we support the government to deliver on what they think are the priorities for the country, so sort of jobs and growth, and showcase and highlight that sustainability is the way to do that. So we're doing a lot of polling, we're doing a lot of research. Hopefully we're going to publish some research later on, maybe next year, on how net zero and net zero investment can actually benefit different communities right across the UK, which I think would be really positive. And so there's there's an awful lot we can do in that sense. We're doing a lot of work in the media as well. We've really boosted our media profile over the last couple of years, which I'm really, really pleased about. The FT is excitingly quoting us quite often on a lot of sustainable finance topics, but that's what we're also experiencing, and this is where I think it's quite worrying, is we're also experiencing a bit of a backlash. And in the US, as you might be aware, there's been this huge backlash against ESG. It's not a grassroots backlash. This is not something that's come from just the ground up. Most people don't even know what the acronym ESG stands for. But what has happened is there's been this because there's been a gap, because there has been this lack of knowledge about ESG, there's been this coordinated campaign in the Republican Party, and also probably by some of the oil and gas industries and elsewhere, to demonstrate and showcase that ESG is bad and is causing problems for the country. And there's the nature of woke capitalism, which of course is a made up concept. So we are fighting back against that, and there's some evidence that there's a little bit of that happening in the UK. Certainly, there are a lot of vested interests that do not want to see the UK succeed as growing our economy, creating jobs by becoming net zero or moving towards net zero. There's a lot of people that don't want, the legacy industries do not want us to succeed in that. I think our job is to defend that, to defend the reasons why that's important, and to make sure that that people realise that this is not a threat to their jobs. This is actually something that's going to make the country and the economy stronger.
Sure, and you have the unique position, in addition to your role with UKSIF, as the chair of the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance, where you're working with financial institutions around the world. Now, we don't have a huge amount of time, but just from a global perspective, outside of what you've already discussed right now, what are some of the global trends that you're seeing, and how do you think that the UK compares with their positions?
Yeah, sorry, I'm definitely speak too long. I remember telling you in advance that I'm going to talk way too much, and so apologies if I've overspoken on some of my answers. The global work's super interesting, and we bring together all the different SIFs from across the world. Now, I should say that they're mostly in the kind of the global north at the moment. One of my priorities is to help SIFs to grow and thrive in the global south as well. So we're supporting India SIF at the moment to get off the ground. And so there's quite a lot going on globally. But I think what's really interesting is this kind of consistency. Pretty much every country is thinking about where its regulations can move forward, particularly right across Europe. But also in Japan, there's a lot of work on regulation, and Australia and New Zealand as well. So everybody's trying and figuring out and finding their way. I think one of the big challenges is regulatory divergence, and this idea that across the world there are a whole range of different governments that are putting in different bits of regulation, and thinking about not thinking about it in the context of global financial services as an industry globally. And so many of our members now looking at this and saying, well, hang on, we've got to apply this bit of regulation in Canada, this bit of regulation in Australia, this bit of regulation in Europe, this bit in the UK. They're all trying to do the same thing, but they're doing it in slightly different ways, which means that the amount of time required is massive. So one of our focus areas is, well, how can we get some regulatory convergence, but crucially, without lowering the bar? And that's quite hard to do. So we want the G20 or the G7 to start thinking about a kind of regulatory convergence task force on sustainability and sustainable finance. I think that would be a really positive step forward. This what I talked earlier about, these misaligned incentives, the reason why investors are not incentivized to invest in the good stuff, is also a really significant global problem. And I think that across the world, we've got this challenge that governments don't fully understand how finance works. It's quite unusual for people that have had really strong experience inside financial services to be government ministers or to be senior civil servants. And so how do we get that financial services thinking and understanding into governments, and particularly the understanding of how finance flows, what causes finance to flow in one direction or another, is still, I think, a bit of an unknown feature for a lot of governments. And so partly what we're trying to do is educate governments on that. So yeah, the global work's really exciting. We definitely want to be at the, so this is building up an organization. At the moment, it's just a kind of very loose network. We've got no money, no team, no nothing. I'm trying to build that up into creating this global network that can have this powerful voice at the top table, whether that's the UN or whether that's the OECD or others, and really help focus minds on how to get finance flowing to the transition.
Sure, but again, back to that collaboration point, which I can see as a real theme throughout your career. So I think it's in good hands with you with you in that position. From a I suppose a talent perspective. Sustainability, and from what you've been describing, it often requires, or perhaps always requires, a sales skill set in some capacity, but particularly when you're navigating these big, complex problems. Really quickly, what would be your tips around how do you sell sustainability and these solutions to the different stakeholders that you might have, governments, businesses, even the public, I suppose? And what's your approach to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, when you take out the professions like being a lawyer or being a doctor or dentist, pretty much every job comes down to two things: sales and project management. And I think that those are the skills that people should really think about when it comes to, career progression and career development, whether that's selling yourself, selling your vision, selling your organization, or indeed project managing a whole complex range of approaches, whether you're doing that project yourself or whether you're managing others to do things. And so those are the really important, I guess, softer skills to develop. On the sales front, I mean, sales kind of has a bad rap, but actually what you're really talking about is having a vision, developing a vision, and then encouraging people to buy into that and to kind of get behind it. And I think part of it is really believing it yourself and spending a lot of time thinking about, what are the reasons why people might not agree with this, and how do I convince them that they should, and that those reasons are not right? So when I was going around trying to get funding for this project preparation facility at C40, we needed a ton of money. Eventually we got 40 million quid, which is like crazy. But when I was going around selling that vision to the national governments of the world, if you mess up trying to sell that, you've only got about 5 people that could possibly be funding that, so you can't screw it up. But what we did is every time people asked us some set of really hard questions, rather than saying, oh, that's annoying, they asked hard questions, I would go back and I would sit down with me and the team and we'd work out the answers to all those hard questions. And we'd work out, well, do we need to tweak our approach to try and make to match, or do we just want to kind of plow on with our vision and show that it achieves these things? But I think, not just discounting people's opposition, but actually trying to work out, well, what is it that you're struggling with here, and how can we answer those questions? How can we address that? So I think sales is so important, but it's really what you fundamentally need is to have a vision and have a view for how to achieve that and how to get people bought into that vision. And that's not just external either. That's internal too. Making sure that the whole team has a shared vision of where we want to go, and what we're focusing on, why we come to work in the morning is absolutely vital. For sure. I had a colleague that I used to work with at one of the colleges, and she was a principal of a college, and she said the first 2 years of running a college is really, really hard because people come to you and you have to correct them on the things that they're doing to make it the way that you want it to be done. After 2 years, people know what you want, and so they come to you with the thing that they know you want, and so you're just sort of approving things, and that's true, I think, of pretty much any organization. But that only works if you communicate what you actually want, and you're really upfront and strong, and say, well, first of all, know what you want, then communicate it, and then make sure that you get it, and then after a while, people say, well, this is how we work around here, this is how we do things, and that's how you get to be a mission-led organization. That's how you get to be an organization where everybody's driving in the same direction rather than at odds with one another.
For sure. I don't know whether you've read a book called The Power of Purpose. It's John O'Brien and Andrew Cave, but I'd highly recommend it. It's about the the alignment between purpose-driven organisations, from the top down to begin with, but then it becomes a bottom-up approach as well by everybody buying into this vision, and the examples of the ability to grow organizations, businesses, institutions through the power of purpose. It's something I'd definitely recommend to you or to anyone listening to this. My last question then, before the Better Than We Found It one, is that I talk to a lot of sustainability individuals who aren't in finance, and I talk to a lot of finance individuals who aren't necessarily in sustainability, who want to pivot specifically into sustainable finance and where they merge. What might your advice be to people that want to make that transition?
I mean, the last couple of years has been a bit tough for sustainable finance. This, partly because the Ukraine war has driven up oil prices, and so oil and gas firms have fared a lot better. The cost of living crisis has made people kind of double down on financial returns rather than thinking about the wider society. But I think that's temporary. That's a blip. I think what we also know is that over the long term, funds that are managed sustainably will always perform better. That's just a fact. If you're incorporating the full range of ESG risks into your management of your capital, then you're gonna over the long term perform better. So I think that long term, this is an industry that's definitely in a good place, or moving in the right direction. I think if people are interested in being part of this, I think a key thing is to read up and understand what this industry is about. I talked about that Cambridge University Sustainable Finance Essentials course. I think that's a good place to start. There's actually quite a few free courses online as well that are definitely worth looking up. I think the London Stock Exchange Group has got some free courses that are available on their website as well around sustainability. So well worth looking into some of that. Get involved as well. One of the exciting things about UKSIF membership is that it's a corporate membership, so anybody can be part of what we do, come along to our events. So if your company is a member, then you can ask if you can come along to our things and be part of our network and share. And what we're always excited about is people that kind of come from a finance first background and that are interested in sustainability. Because what we definitely can't have is a bunch of people that only know about sustainability trying to speak to finance folks about how they should be doing sustainability, because often it doesn't translate very well. Having some people that have got a really strong finance background who are also then interested in sustainability is such an important part of the development of this industry. It can't just be people that see it as a good career opportunity, a good way to earn a bonus. It's got to be people that are really passionate and really care about it. But there are lots of opportunities out there for that, and we see so many people that want to do that pivot, want to do that shift, and see the opportunity in sustainable finance as well.
For sure, yeah. I mean, my recommendation whenever I talk to individuals, particularly who are non-sustainability background, is to ask them to consider actually, well, how can you make your current role as sustainably focused as possible? Every role should be a sustainability role. Every role has the ability to influence positively for sustainability. You just need to look for those opportunities. So there's always things you can be doing side of desk that can enhance your organization and your own output and impact. And I think sometimes people kind of see it quite black and white, that I'm either in a sustainability role and therefore I do it, or I'm in another role and therefore it's not my wheelhouse. But actually, I think taking those things on, or those projects, or becoming part of it, even if you're not in that role, can be of real benefit, and I think is needed for everybody to understand their collective responsibility to drive this forward.
Yeah, that's so true, and every role is going to have this. If you're in charge of procurement, then how can you procure more sustainability? If you're running a fund, the same applies. What is it that you can bring to that? But even basic things like asking your clients what their values are when it comes to sustainability. You'd be amazed at how many people don't ask those sort of questions. But actually, when they do, their clients say, well, actually, no, I really care about these things. I care about the future of the oceans. I care about nature. I care about the impact climate change might have on my grandchildren. People really genuinely care. But often they find that they're never asked these questions. And so engage with your clients on these things and find out what they care about, and then find out how you can apply what they care about to your particular role. I think it's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And we haven't really spoken about it, but that's, I suppose, the whole concept of value creation through sustainability. Is it doesn't need to be a regulatory thing. Of course, regulation is important and it drives systemic change. But actually, as an organisation, sustainability can be used as a real competitive advantage. And I think that particularly in finance, there's some firms that are doing some really exciting things in the alternative space that are focusing on nature and natural capital and other areas that actually are going to put their organization, if you purely put it from a commercial perspective, better by using sustainability. So you don't have to they can be hand in hand. You don't have to sacrifice returns to be sustainable. I think that sometimes people have that misconception, which we should definitely banish.
But just on that very quickly, like, our very strong view is that it cannot be a charity endeavor to get the world to net zero. This has got to be an approach that works for everybody. And as if people think of it as some sort of charitable project that they do on the side of their desk that's not going to make any money, then this is doomed to failure. This has got to be something that actually can drive growth, economy, and that can bring people with it, because it has a great opportunity around it, and it does. And this is the really exciting thing, is that all of these things actually are really positive from a kind of portfolio growth perspective. There's some incredible companies out there that are doing great stuff around. We're still going to need energy. The question is, how is that generated? So it's still going to be people generating energy to sell it. So where it's about where you make your money from in that market.
For sure, absolutely. And look, you've done so much already in your career, James. But I suppose from my last question perspective, I'd like to know that by the end of your career, how you would like to look back on it to know that you've left the world better than you found it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, and I think one of the challenges of this industry is sometimes it's quite nebulous what you're actually achieving. We've changed some regulation, which then means people do things differently here, which means that happens there. And further down the chain, it's really hard to know that something actually changed as a result of what you're doing. But we know that that's what's happening. We're changing the system, and when you change the system, the outcomes of the system are very different. One of the nice things about the project preparation work is you actually see real life projects. There's a bus corridor in Mexico City that now exists because of our project. There's a whole solar farm in Curitiba in Brazil that is now being built. So real life stuff. But I think broadly speaking, what I want to achieve, I think that achieving this systems change is where it's now at. It's about thinking about what are the systemic barriers that are stopping things from happening. Now, changing a system is very complicated, very hard, but we built the system. The system didn't just magically appear by itself. It's a system that's been built over, often hundreds of years of culture and approaches. We need to change our system. We need to change our system quickly. And so I will retire, theoretically, I think I'll be 68 right around 2050, which in theory is when the world should be getting, to net zero. So that's where I want us to be. That's what I'm really focused on, is kind of realizing that's not a lot of time, both in terms of my own career, my own mortality perhaps, but also in the context of the world and the systems that the world operates in. So it's about thinking about not just about how we succeed, but how we succeed within the timelines that we have, how we do things at the pace and scale that we need to. And so that's what I'm really focused on. That's what motivates me, is take the little victories, but also recognize that they need to become big victories to move things forward.
For sure, excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll do your all to make that happen, and it looks like and sounds like from what you've done already that you'll play a huge part in that. So look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to understand more about your career, about UKSIF, and the work that you're doing. I'm sure there's individuals listening that would love to engage and connect with you. So whilst you did admit that you're not always on top of your LinkedIn inbox, LinkedIn's a good place, but also they can come directly to UKSIF and engage with you.
Absolutely, yeah. No, feel free. I mean, LinkedIn is a good way to get in touch. But yeah, feel free to get in touch. Ping me. If you are actually from one of the firms that's a member, our membership list is on our website. If your firm is a member, please do feel free to get involved and see what we do and come along to our events and get active. You don't just have to be in sustainability to be part of what we do. So we'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to get into it, and I look forward to checking in soon to see how it's all going.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.